limitations. I want to talk about the limitations of this whole concept of full disclosure. Because when I think of full disclosure, and when a lot of women think about the word full disclosure, it means everything all at once. I got it all. There's not going to be any more. It's all over. I got the story. The problem is that is not the case. There are significant limitations in the process called full disclosure. Now, over the years and working with addicts and partners and marriages, I'm talking about day in, day out for 30 plus years. Okay, this is all I've done with my life, is to dedicate it to addicts and partners and their marriages and seeing them get well. You learn a lot of things doing it hands-on, day in, day out. And I've learned that the whole term, full disclosure, is really a problem. And so I want to talk through that because according to an article in the Journal of Sexual Addiction and Compulsivity by Jennifer Snyder, Deborah Corley, Richard Irons, and these are all great people, and they've done a lot of really good work. But the article is called Surviving Disclosure, an international study of 164 recovering sex addicts and partners. Now, it's a great article, and they surveyed these 164 people who went through disclosure. Now, this is in the model we've been talking about, in the first model. This article is significantly dated. And so what they found is 42% of the men who did full disclosure with their spouse said they were still withholding significant information about the past behaviors from their spouse. Now, let's just stop there a second. So 42%, that's not quite half, but it's almost half of the men were lying. Now, when you have a process and you call it full disclosure, and 40+% of the men are lying, and I don't know how many lied actually on the survey, but let's just say the ones that are being honest, 42% were lying to their wife at full disclosure. Now, that tells me that there's a significant limitation on the process when only 60% are actually telling the truth. That's a concern. And they continued in this article, 36% of the men said they were withholding significant information about current sexual behaviors. Now that means that a third or more were lying about probably relapses, things they were up to, people they were talking to, images they were seeing, masturbation, pornography, all that kind of stuff, while they were saying they did full disclosure. Now, I don't know about you, but if I went to a doctor and he said to me, listen, I know what you got, your problem is. I got something that might help you, maybe 40% chance. Okay, that would be something I might not consider. This is a problem in full disclosure because addicts are spiritually, emotionally, and morally immature in the early stages, and it's human nature sometimes to want to hide that. That's one issue. We'll get to some others. Number two, the second limitation on this term, full disclosure, is it's not measured. I was the first in our field of sexual addiction to introduce the concept of using a polygraph. And it was a very legitimate situation where a woman was married to an addict in the beginning, got divorced, married another guy, and found a porn magazine. And she was totally convinced this guy was another sex addict. I said, well, bring him in. Let's talk to him. I talked to him. I was totally convinced he was not a sex addict. So we had a problem. The reality versus what she believed. How do we bridge that? I said, well, let's just do a polygraph. And I still use that same polygrapher 30 years later. She's great. But we did a polygraph. We verified that that was left in his drawer. He hasn't seen pornography in years. He's not going to strip clubs. He's not doing anything. And they lived happily ever after. And we've probably done 1,000 polygraphs. And so because we measure what the addict is saying, the increased effectiveness of what we will later get into called the factual disclosure is so much more higher. Because now the wife objectively knows that what she's being told is really highly likely to be the truth, as opposed to wondering. This guy who's lied to me for 30 years, he told me this is everything, but my gut it's not right, Dr. Weiss. I'll never forget, I had a case. A professional athlete, they went to a very expensive treatment center. They probably spent $50,000 to $70,000 there. And when they came back, it was 2 weeks after they came back, and the wife was still livid. And they called my office and they said, she's like, I know he's lying. I know that he's lying. And in this treatment center, they didn't do polygraphs. They weren't operating off that model whatsoever. And most of them still don't. And so I said, well, why don't you come in? We'll do a polygraph and then we'll kind of settle this issue between the two of you. You spent $70,000. You deserve to know what the truth is. Let's figure this out. So they did. They came in to my office and we did a polygraph, and sure enough, he was lying through his teeth. He lied about several affairs. He lied about stopping contacting them. She was right 100%. And then they started a process of ongoing polygraphs to verify that this was no longer happening in their lives. And to the best of my knowledge, they're still married. But see, her gut knew. And the limitation of not measuring a full disclosure is a significant limitation, because addicts are not always the most mature people or the most, not self-centered. Okay, I know I need to do this for you, but they would rather protect themselves. And that's what the research supports. The third limitation is the full disclosure leads to an idea of an event and not a process. Much like kind of in the man's world, we're told to talk to our sons about sex. And, if we have that one, 45-second conversation with our son, we've had the sex talk. It's an event. We did it. And we tell our wives we did it. But it's not. I mean, if you're going to have a sexually healthy son, you got to talk to him more than one time. It's an ongoing process through adolescence and young adulthood. Okay. In the same way, recovery is a process, and it's a healing process. And so is disclosure. Disclosure has several facets, which we're going to get into in great detail. And we'll walk you through the various types of disclosures, because each one serves a specific purpose. And when we use the word full disclosure, we think it's all done. And it's not. And it's not even honest in a good portion of the time. So we're going to move away from the whole idea of this full disclosure thing and move into different types of language. We'll talk about a factual disclosure. We'll talk about a story disclosure. We'll talk about validating amends. We'll talk about day-to-day disclosure, because all of these play a part in the process that we call recovery.